Welcome to Android Dialogues, where we have bite-sized conversations with people in the Android community. I'm Huyen and I'm speaking with
Phil Shadlyn.
And we're currently in Chicago for Chicago Roboto. You're speaking tomorrow, right, Phil?
Yeah, tomorrow morning.
So I have invaded Phil's talk prep time to talk to him a little bit today. Phil, where are you based and how did you get started in Android?
Cool. So I'm based in Toronto, Canada. And I got into Android about 5 or 6 years ago. I was working as an engineer at the time and not really digging it. And then, but I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. But I had a Galaxy S2 at the time, and one day I just started tinkering, and here we are. Nice.
And this week, Phil, you're talking about something which I think is actually of particular interest these days, and that is the architecture components. I'd be really interested to hear, Phil, on what you have to say about architecture components, and that's kind of the gist of your talk, isn't it?
Yeah. It's sort of my experience using them in, because I think if you read all the tutorials and stuff online, typically sort of gives you examples of architecture components in nice, sort of very simple kind of apps that are great for learning.
Yeah.
But then it doesn't give you a great idea as to how they might scale or how they might work with a sort of a larger, more complicated project.
Absolutely.
So that was sort of my goal for the talk, was to sort of see how they performed in a real world situation in a sort of a new app that was designed to use them from scratch.
Nice. So which components in particular do you use? Because I know, so let's try to enumerate them. So what are the architecture components?
Sure. So so I guess first, before we talk about the components, just a quick thing about, I guess, architecture.
Cool.
So up until about a year ago, I guess us as Android developers, we didn't really have a good or any really recommendation or officially supported architecture in Android.
Yeah.
They released, I'm assuming, I guess it was around the same time as the architecture components, they released sort of their architecture guidelines.
Yes.
Which recommended an MVVM architecture. And the architecture components are a group of libraries that they released or announced last year at I/O that are sort of designed to allow you to achieve that architecture in a easy and Android friendly way. So it takes care of a lot of the lifecycle issues for you that the problems that you run into with other architectures, this solves for you without you having to do much work.
Nice. So addressing Android pain points, but with a MVVM kind of flavor.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. So what are the particular components that you've been working with?
So I'm talking mostly about three. We've got LiveData, which is essentially sort of, it kind of makes your existing model classes into almost like an observable, so you can observe changes to the data when it's updated. There's also view models, which are not the view model in the architecture, in the MVVM architecture, but actually a class you can extend or inherit from in Android that is designed to sort of keep all your view-related data. And it's also, as I mentioned, it kind of the architecture components take care of a lot of the Android issues for you. View models are actually designed to persist config changes as well. So it's super nice that when you, say, rotate your device, when the activity is recreated, it grabs your existing view model that you had before, so you don't have to requery any data or anything like that.
Nice.
And then finally, I use Room as well. So Room is an abstraction over top of SQLite, so that you don't have to use the horrendous SQLite APIs in Android anymore. So and yeah, it allows you to just do database operations with very minimal code on your part.
When you were starting to build kind of like your real world like application, like how easily could you kind of build from scratch with them?
I would say sort of, I guess, like a medium amount of effort, I guess. So there's definitely a lot of sort of reading and prep to do a little beforehand to sort of understand the intricacies, I guess, of how they all work together if you're looking to create an app that uses all of them. But I think a good tip for starting and sort of how I did it was sort of just learning one at a time.
Yeah, okay.
So the first thing I did was just do all the Room stuff, and so I just focused on making sure that all my data was being saved, and then once that was all done, then I kind of moved on to LiveData and understood how that worked, and then I tossed all those in a view model and sort of tied it all together.
Nice.
And I think, and yeah, that was just sort of my experience, and it worked really well for me. So because all three of them together is definitely a lot to take in.
So you're able to kind of like build each piece in isolation, and then kind of when you're kind of comfortable with how it's kind of interacting with like your data and how it's persisting things, you're able to kind of connect the dots a bit?
Essentially. So Room for they all I guess they kind of lead into one sort of leads into another. So if you start with Room, that sort of does all your saves all your data for you.
Gotcha.
And then you can have Room return live data objects. So once you're all done with Room, then it returns live data, which you sort of get an understanding on how that works. And then once you've got an idea how that works, you can toss those live datas into a view model, and then get the view model working and sort of kind of go step by step and kind of get everything working that way.
I actually like that progression because, right, so you start with Room to persist your data. And as I understand it, so live data, like as you mentioned, kind of has like an observably, that's a real word.
That's a word.
Because when I hear observable, obviously the thing that kind of a lot of us think of is RxJava. But so how does live data work in terms of like the observableness? I'm making up words right now. Like I'm sure, hopefully y'all understand what the heck I'm talking about.
I do. So
Good. That's progress.
When you create a live data object, it's basically it takes a generic, and the generic is whatever model class that you have. So in my case, the app I wrote was a sort of a reminders app. So
nice.
In my case, the model object I was using was reminder, and so you can basically just wrap the reminder in a live data object, which all it really does is sort of monitor the value of that reminder, and when it changes, it pushes that reminder to any of its subscribers.
Gotcha.
So subscribing or observing a live data object is similar to RxJava, like the in the sense that you get your live data object and you attach a listener to it or an observer. But it's very different from say observables or flowables in the sense that it doesn't come with any of the nice operators and that I like to pretend that I understand what a lot of them do, but
we all do.
Yeah. So it doesn't come with any of that. There are limited transformations that come with it that you can do. Like I think map and SwitchMap I think are the two that you can use, but that's basically it. So it has the same, I guess, sort of publisher-subscriber paradigm, but it's just quite a bit more limited when compared to RxJava.
Now, something that, I guess in like my adventures in RxJava land that I've had to deal with Android is obviously lifecycle, like knowing when to subscribe, when to kind of unsubscribe, or I guess when to dispose now that we're in RxJava 2 world. Does LiveData handle any of that for you?
Yes.
Nice.
And that's one of the really nice things about it is it's sort of designed for Android. So if you have an activity that is, say, subscribing to a live data object from a view model, and then that activity is destroyed, let's say, if before, say, the live data object was finished, updating or whatever, it won't actually deliver the new value to any observers that no longer exist. So you no longer have to do any unsubscribe calls or dispose or anything like that. It just sort of takes care of the life cycle for you.
So it just works.
Yes.
Is that accurate to say that you kind of just, as long as you are following, I guess, implementing the right interfaces or kind of like connecting the right dots, it literally takes care of all of it behind the scenes?
Yeah. It's if your observer no longer exists, then it won't push data and it won't crash. So.
Nice. And ViewModel actually seems kind of interesting, like because as you mentioned, it's kind of meant, and I thought this was pretty fantastic that is meant to kind of help persist data across configuration changes, but that's not the same for like process, like when processes are killed, right? So you do have to do some state management, but what are some other great things about ViewModel?
So yeah, I guess the persist config changes is a big one. And another really nice thing about it is, I guess it's similar to most architectures, but it gets a lot of your logic outside of, say, the activity or fragment and into a pure Java class. So even though you're extending a class that comes with the Android framework, it doesn't actually really have anything to do with the Android lifecycle or anything like that, or have anything to do with any Android components. So you can basically just run pure JVM tests on your view model, which is super handy and really nice and goes towards the whole goal of one of the goals of architecture components coming from Google was to make your apps more testable, and because I know testing on Android has been something we've been
very important,
very frustrated with, and very frustrated with for a long time.
Exactly. Did you experiment at all with kind of like ViewModel and LiveData kind of interacting with, say, other libraries that we typically use, like Dagger or other dependency injection things? Did you play around with anything like that at all?
Yeah. So I used Dagger in the app. So yeah, there's a couple of ways depending on how you like to inject stuff, but with the view model, one of the things that's sort of one little gotcha, I guess, is that when you're creating a view model, you don't necessarily instantiate it directly. Like, so normally, like when you instantiate a class, if with Java you'd throw you'd new it up or whatever.
Right. Yeah. I like that. New it up.
Yes. Now I'm making up terms. Yeah.
That's what we like to do around here.
So typically that's how you'd instantiate a class.
Gotcha.
With a view model, you don't actually do that because if you do that, then you don't get the benefit of it persisting.
Right. So you need Android to actually manage the instantiation of it so that it can react to. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
So in order to instantiate the view model, there's a method there's a static method on the class. It's ViewModelProviders.of, and that method will allow you to get a view model for your specific activity or fragment.
Nice.
And then when you create it, it sort of caches it so it can grab it later in the event that your activity, say, is recreated. So when and then getting to the factory, which is I guess the next part I was going to mention, was that if you need to pass in any constructor parameters, obviously you're not creating a new instance, so it's you can't do that in your typical fashion.
Yeah.
So there's an interface you can implement that will tell Android what parameters to put into the constructor of the view model, so that when it creates it, you get the data that you need in the constructor, basically. And so typically in terms of injection, I've seen I guess a few different strategies on how to do it with a view model. So one strategy is to just inject directly into the view model. So the view model basically has no constructor parameters, ideally, and just gets all its stuff injected. And then a second way is inject some of the things you need into the factory itself, and then have the factory provide it through the constructor.
Oh,
and
interesting.
Then,
okay.
So you can so you do the injection through there. So in my case, I actually did both, because in one case one worked better, and I also, I guess, wanted to see which worked better, or which I thought was more natural for me, at least.
Yeah.
But it was definitely pretty easy to do, and a lot of options for something like that. So
nice. So it's not just like we're throwing away kind of like the things that we've been doing for the past X number of years.
Yeah,
it all kind of it can work with, and it sounds like it works really well. Like it's not even like a kind of shimming kind of like janky thing, but it actually kind of works well. That's pretty.
For sure.
Good to hear. It's good to hear. Is there anything in particular that surprised you, or that you thought was really neat that you kind of didn't anticipate as you were kind of building your real application with the
yeah, for sure. One thing is you sort of mentioned that a couple times that sort of everything just works and stuff. I was definitely impressed at how it was very much like that. Like a lot of things did just sort of work, and I was expecting to have a lot more headaches than I actually did come across, which was really great. One thing that really kind of blew my mind, and obviously you can achieve this with other patterns as well, but one of the nice things with LiveData specifically is if you are, say, in my case, for example, I was getting a list of reminders from the database through Room. And Room returned a LiveData or a flowable of say, list reminder.
Okay. Cool.
And so if your sort of Room query is backed or returns a LiveData or RxJava return type, then when the backing data in the database is updated, and if you are subscribed to a LiveData that if the data behind that query changes, then that data automatically gets pushed to the LiveData object. So it essentially goes from database to UI, without you really having to do anything else at all.
Nice.
So the first time I saw that, where I had my sort of my list of reminders, and I went to my detail activity to add a new one, and then when I add the new one, I saved it to the database from the detail activity and went back to the list activity, and without me doing anything else, my list was updated. I was yeah, it was extremely exciting. I was probably more excited than I should have been.
No, I mean, I think that's the kind of thing. I think it's fair to say a lot of us tend to be a little bit skeptical. There's always a healthy amount of skepticism when something new comes out. Is it actually going to work? Is this going to become a thing? Is it going to be actually useful? Sounds like the answer to some of those questions, at least, is yes.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I don't want to give away the end of my talk or anything.
No, because I really want you to watch Phil's talk, so we're not no spoilers, not too many spoilers anyway.
Sure.
But
I guess the one thing I did find was, at least in my experience, there was nothing I found that, I mean, definitely gotchas and things to be aware of, and annoyances, but Definitely nothing I came across that would make me not recommend it to someone else not recommend giving it a shot. The nice thing about architecture components is that they all work very well together, but they also work separately very well.
I was going to ask you that, like, how, like, can you kind of like use just one piece of it, or like maybe if you are kind of skeptical and you want, and someone just wanted to say like just try LiveData, do they work well in isolation? But you just said yes.
Definitely.
So obviously we don't want to talk too much because we really want you to see Phil's talk at Chicago Roboto, which I believe will be recorded. Thank you so much, Phil.
Thank you very much.
I definitely am even more excited now to continue trying architecture components. Like it always feels intimidating when this new thing comes along at a Google I/O and like, okay, do I need to try this now? Do I need to re-architect everything? But it's always nice to hear that people have tried it in like real applications and that it works. Just works. But thank you so much, Phil.
Thank you very much.
If people wanted to find you on the internet, how can they do that?
I guess the easiest way is probably Twitter, and my handle's PhysPhil. It's PhysPhil.
Awesome. We'll have it in a little like banner right about here. But thank you so much, Phil.
Thank you.
And thank you all, and we'll see you next time. Bye.